The Ohio General Assembly starts back up for the fall session after the summer recess this coming week, and in the Senate and in the House as well. The key topic, the key question is, what are you going to do about property taxes? Well, expect some overrides. Hello, everyone. I'm John Fortney. Welcome to a special edition of the President's Podcast as we take a look at the best of podcasts with Senate President Rob McColley, Senator Jerry Cirino, who is the finance chairman, Senator Sandra O'Brien, a former county auditor, and of course, our education chair, Senator Andrew Brenner, as they talk about the potential for veto overrides.
Property taxes have become a kitchen table issue over the last several years after the most recent valuation cycle that we've seen in many counties across the state. And when there's a kitchen table issue, it is our duty to react quickly and react accordingly to that kitchen table issue. So a brief history about how we got to this point. There was an amendment to our Constitution that allowed decades ago for a tax to be levied on property in the state of Ohio. You have, of course, your inside millage and your outside millage, your 20 mil floor, et cetera, all of those things that make this thing kind of complicated. But a mill is $1 for every $1,000 of assessed value. Your assessed value is 35% of your market value. So on a $100,000 home, your assessed value is going to be $35,000. So the way that this works is you had your 10 inside mills. So you would have $10 for every $1,000 that would be levied across the board and would be split among local political subdivisions. Those inside mills, as the thousands of dollars of valuations would grow, the inside mills would be inflationary. However, outside millage that was outside of that 10 inside mills was supposed to be anti-inflationary. And so if your 10 inside mills, if you were a political subdivision who received money from it, if you were generating $1 million of revenue from those 10 inside mills and you had a levy outside that was for an additional $500,000, and a revaluation occurred that said your 10 mills is now worth $1.2 million, you were only supposed to collect the $1.5 million. You didn't get to collect the half million on top of the 1.2. You would still only collect your additional $300,000 to get to the 1.5 million number that you were already at. That was the anti-inflationary element of it. Fast forward several years later, the 20 mil floor was enacted for our school districts, whereby school districts each would get 20 mills at the very least, but the same would apply. You would be at the 20 mil floor if the valuation of 20 mills increased and you were at the floor, you would go up a little bit. If you had millage on top of the 20 mil floor and the 20 mil valuation increased, you wouldn't get an increase, provided that your increase didn't eat up the entire amount of the amount that you were collecting on top of the 20 mil floor. This has changed an awful lot over the past several decades, where the legislature has, probably not in recent times, but in times in the past, probably 20, 30 years ago, started allowing for exceptions on the 20 mil floor calculation. So now you have school districts primarily, which receive about 70% of the property taxes collected, go to the local school district. You have school districts primarily that may be receiving that $1 million number at the 20 mil floor and collecting $500,000 on top of it. While the 20 mil valuation goes up to $1.2 million, they still collect the $500,000 on top of it, and including some inflation. So they're getting a double dip of an inflationary increase that was not supposed to be the way that this thing worked.
Took a lot of people by surprise, certainly. It was something that you wanted to follow up on those.
Well, no, the property tax issue is very complex, and as the president just went through that, these are very difficult things for the average voter to understand and appreciate. But I think the point I was going to make is that, unfortunately, a lot of people in our state think that the state legislature has got a silver bullet to eliminate all of their concerns and the pain that they're feeling, many of them, for higher valuations and thus higher property taxes. And it's not as simple as that. And we are already, with the rollback, we are already paying really 12% of people's property taxes from the state's budget. Okay, people don't realize that, and I tell people that all the time. They have no idea. But the solution to dealing with the property tax challenges right now is got to be it's like a multivariable equation, because you've got the schools, which are 70% plus of our property taxes. And so when I have people complain about property taxes, and I ask them, have you voted for your school levies? And the answer is yes, we have. Well, you're voting to increase your property taxes, depending on where you live to some extent. And so we can provide some relief in our budget that we accepted yesterday in our sub-bill. We have a number of different solutions that deal with the school systems and how they operate, how they deal with money that they have left over in their operating funds. We increased the homestead exemption by $50 million for those that are most vulnerable to property value and tax increases. We're doing a lot of things to increase transparency in the school systems. We're forcing the transparency issue in our budget bill.
Yeah, that's really important. And one of the things, too, that I thought was really monumental within the property tax policy discussion was our substitute bill. The Senate substitute bill bans new replacement and new emergency levies. Why is that important?
Well, I think we've had conversations before about replacement levies and that people confuse them in some cases with renewal levies that would be at the same dollar amount or the same millage. Replacement levies oftentimes are at higher dollar amounts, and in some cases they also are exempt from the 20 mil floor calculation. And so we would be eliminating that. Emergency levies are something that have been misused for quite some time by school districts.
Interesting how they turn into a permanent levy after a while.
Well, emergency levies can go on for 5 or 10 years, and oddly enough, there are very few qualifiers to even put an emergency levy on the ballot. There are a number of school districts that I've talked to that have had emergency levies on the ballot for almost 40 years. What emergency lasts 40 years? I'm not really sure. I think in many cases, the school districts were putting them on because they realized they were more likely to get passed if they called them an emergency. And they were also putting them on because they realized they didn't count towards the 20 mil floor calculation. So you would get, if you put those emergency levies on, you would get your double dip of inflationary increase, even though you were collecting well above the 20 mil floor amount.
We talked about transparency as well, that when you will be reviewing, when you would go to the ballot and you'd be trying to review whatever the levy request was, and then, well, what's a mill? As President McColley just described what a mill is, it raises $1 per every $1,000 of valuation, but it can be very lengthy, verbose, hard to follow. This bill actually provides transparency in describing exactly what the cost of the levy would be on a basic $100,000 home.
Yes.
Straightforward language.
Straightforward language, because, look, we've all gone to the ballot box and seen levy language that says it's adding 3.5 mils to your property tax liability. Many people, myself included, would go into the ballot box and say, how's that really going to impact me? What's the dollar amount as it's going to impact my home? We also would see people referencing assessed value and whatnot. We just need to make it simple to understand. We need to say, this is how much money will be generated per $100,000 of market value. So somebody can go in and say, my house is worth $200,000 or $300,000 or $400,000. Simple multiplier that says, if it's going to generate $150 of extra property taxes for every $100,000 of value, I'm in a $200,000 home. That's another $300. Then I can make my decision as to whether I want to support it.
Were you satisfied with what the legislature, at least in the Senate, did with the state budget as far as property tax reform?
I was very satisfied, and I had an integral part in helping that get through and actually putting the wording in it. I have to say I was disappointed in Governor DeWine when he line item vetoed all of that. So we'll see what happens when we get back there in a few years. But I also want to mention our public schools today, it's called mission creep. They are there to teach basics, and we have gotten so far away from that. I mean, we've got health centers, we've got huge athletics, all kinds of things. Well, there's only so much time in a day. So we're losing some of that focus on basics. And then we wonder why the test scores are poor. The poor teachers are like, what am I supposed to do here? I can't do all of this.
Extracurriculars are important and definitely add to the educational experience, but you have to be able to do the basics. You have to be able to graduate, get a diploma, be prepared for the next level, whether it's college or sports or whatever it is. The basics have to be met at first.
And basics are during the day. Extracurricular are after, technically, the school day. So, yeah, no,
point.
exactly right. So I guess when we come to property taxes, I can tell you I've been to 2 of my county fairs. Anyone that came up to me to talk about this property tax petition, they were all for it.
Well, yeah. I mean, it sounds good, but what do you replace the funds with? Remember, property taxes, the state doesn't have anything to do. The state of Ohio does not raise property taxes. We have policy in there, correct, that we'll talk about here in just a moment. But it truly is the best showcase of local control, or best example of local control, that if there's a levy on the ballot for schools or for the library or for public transportation, then homeowners and property owners, can decide, as well as all the other registered voters who maybe are not property owners, to whether they raise their property taxes or not.
So I go into my teacher mode with them, and I tell them, let me tell you what our property taxes fund. The majority of it goes to our public schools, some to our libraries, and police and fire. And I said, so understand that that's going to affect these entities. And I had one gal say to me, I don't care. I am not going to lose my house over property taxes. John, I didn't know what to say, and that's pretty rare.
Well, one of the things we heard during the Select Committee on Housing that went around the state of Ohio a couple years ago, we heard from retired teachers who maybe they retired in the late 80s, early 90s, so they're fixed income. And their house has been paid for 25 or 30 years as well, but they were afraid that there was a real risk that they could lose their house because they weren't sure that they could keep up with the property taxes because of the increased valuations. And so I hear that side of the story. And that is something that is very troubling for our seniors. And we do have a homestead exemption in the state of Ohio. But I guess to get back to the veto override process, emergency and replacement levies. This is an important part about levy education. Emergency and replacement levies, we banned them. The General Assembly banned them, abolished it, okay? Then the governor vetoed that. The House just overrode that. Why is it important to get rid of replacement and emergency levies?
Because the average voter is busy with their own life. They do not know the intricacies of some of the things they're voting on, and they should. This is America. They need to know what their tax dollars are going to be used for. So they get replacement confused with renewal. Renewal is everything's the same, no increase. Replacement is, oh yes, any new construction, home values going up, you will see an increase. And in my area here, we saw massive increases in taxes in the last few years. Now, emergencies. Those of us, when I ask, what do you think an emergency is? It's something that just happened and it's terrible and we got to fix it. Right. Well, on the committee, on the education committee, I asked some people giving testimonies, what's your school district? Do you have an emergency levy? Yes, we do. What's the emergency? And the person actually said, teaching our children. I said, that's your job. That's not an emergency. So that is deceiving. That is truly deceiving. And that's part of the reason I believe we will change that when the Senate gets down to Columbus. It's not right.
And don't those also fall outside of the anti-inflationary guardrails that I think it was House Bill 920 back in the late 70s established that said, okay, this levy is going to raise this amount of money and no more. But those levies, emergency and replacement levies, they fall outside of those guardrails. That's one of the little secrets that school systems and other governmental entities don't really want you to know about, right? It's a way to game the system.
Right, and it's things like that they don't understand. And it was Governor Voinovich, who used to be Cuyahoga County auditor, who put that bill through when he was in the legislature. And I remember thinking, okay, inside millage is unvoted millage. Yes, Ohioans, you pay taxes that you don't vote on, but there's a cap on it. So I said, I don't know why Governor Voinovich didn't add inside millage. So I sent it over to the Legislative Service Commission, and they said, because it's in the Constitution, inside millage. I said, oh, okay, that made a lot of sense.
I think it's 10 mils.
It is 10 mills, right. But that's not just 10 mills for the schools. That is 10 mills combined for all your political subdivisions. By that I mean cities, villages, townships. I know I'm talking a little bit of auditor jargon.
Well, no, we like that. That's how we learn. I mean, you have really the both sides covered, because not only from the school perspective as a teacher, right, but also from the county auditor perspective, where it's important that the people, the citizens, the voters, and the electorate understand these concepts, because it does get into the weeds quickly and becomes very complex. And then people are outraged when the new valuation process hits. And why am I paying $1,200 more a year in my property taxes?
Right. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the County Budget Commission.
Yeah, what is that?
It's a little bit yawning, I know, but it affects you. It basically is made up, the county auditor is the statutory chair all the time. And then you have the treasurer, and then you have the prosecutor. And they are the watchdogs for the taxpayers. And believe you, the taxpayers need watchdogs. So what we do is we look at your budget. You come in and present it every year. And we make sure that the money that you're collected is going for what you told the voters it was going to go for, and you're not hoarding tax dollars. I remember once when I was county auditor, there was one of the township trustees was also a fireman, and I said, "Wait a minute here. I'm seeing like $500,000, a small township, in your line item here. What is going on?" Because again, we're not going to allow you to hoard money without purpose. He goes, "We're saving for a fire truck." I said, "Put that in writing, okay?" So I could tell constituents, which he did. But my point is that look at the school's carryover balance over billions of dollars.
It's supposed to be a school budget, not a slush fund.
Exactly right. So the tax commissioner should look at all that and lower levies or not increase millage if they don't think so. And I know some of my peers said, "You're not supposed to do that if the people vote on it." I said, "Oh, yes, we are." And the Budget Commission has always had that authority. But sometimes people get a little shy and, well, I know the elected official here and I know the elected official there. Well, you know what? I'm going to represent my taxpayers.
But it's a check and balance
Yes.
on the millage rate, right?
Yes.
It's a check and balance on the total millage, and if you can send some of the money back to the taxpayer, that's called responsible government. And this is something that the General Assembly will also be consider overriding, because it was one of the governor's vetoes.
Absolutely.
Correct?
Absolutely.
What do you think needs to happen? Are you in support of carrying through with a veto override?
I am. I believe my colleagues in the Senate are. The House voted to override one of basically four key vetoes on property tax reform. One of those vetoes that they overrode dealt with those renaming of the emergency levies and those continuing levies to try to rein that in, because what's happened over the years, there are many school districts who have emergency levies that have been around for 20, 30 years or more.
Not an emergency any longer.
No. And I think that for transparency and making sure that the voters know what they're voting for, eliminating those to doing, operating and clearly bond levies, those are one thing for buildings. But I think to have these reforms in place, giving your local budget commissions, which is made up of the auditor, the treasurer, and the prosecutor, oversight over making sure that the millage is correct and isn't collecting too much money from local taxpayers and then hoarding it locally, instead making sure it stays in the taxpayers' pockets, I think is important, especially people on fixed income. You have on almost every suburb in Ohio, it's probably at least $1,000 a month in property taxes. And, if somebody's on fixed income, they cannot afford that. Even middle class can't afford that.
Yeah, we heard, during the Select Committee on Housing, we heard retired teachers, this was a couple years ago, but we heard a couple retired teachers come out and say, my house has been paid for more than a decade, but I've been retired for this amount of time. I'm on a fixed income, and I'm worried I'm going to lose my house based on the property tax bill. I mean, that's really unacceptable.
Totally unacceptable. But you've got to have a fair system that collects from everybody. So I think that, we're going to pass, and I think that we've got to have to wait on the Ohio House to override the governor's other vetoes. When they do, I think we in the Senate will take them up. I have a feeling we will vote to override them. I believe we've got definitely the votes to do it. But I think we also need to look at a broader concept of the taxes themselves. I think maybe some of them should be converted to a sales tax. But that's something that's going to have to be put before the voters as a constitutional amendment. But I think that's going to be part of the discussion that's going to go on over the next year or so is, do we really need this many property taxes or the amount? And should we be adjusted and move it to something like a consumption tax, sales tax, so that everybody is paying into it versus, people who are on fixed income or people who are living in their homes.
Yeah, well, when you talk about emergency levies that have remained almost in perpetuity, that's a problem. And one of the key reasons why the General Assembly decided to do away with emergency and replacement levies was because they also are a way to somewhat, I would describe it as gaming the system, because those fall outside the parameters of that 20 mil floor. So they continue to raise more money as the valuations go up. Is that correct?
Correct. And in fact, like in my own county, I talked to our county auditor in Delaware County, and you were looking at $20+ million of additional revenue to local school districts. I think it was like 26 million, just because of the 20 mil floor. So this is unvoted tax increase. Because of the valuations had gone up so substantially. And a lot of the increase is because of a housing shortage. A lot of it is due to inflation caused by federal government spending, and they're not reining in things at the federal level. So, but the housing prices have gone up 30, 40, 50 or more percent. And if you have that first 20 mils, it'll go up by whatever that value increase is. And I'll tell you, people cannot afford it. I'm hearing it. I know all my colleagues in the Senate are hearing it. We want to do something about it, and I think we will.
Well, you really have an insider's knowledge, too, of real estate and property. That's a big part of what you do for a living. So there's probably a lot of people out there that think, well, I can afford the house payment, and I have the 20% down, but can I afford the property taxes? That's got to be a key question, and that also hurts the economy.
Absolutely. And in fact, if you take a look at even the way the school districts are set up, a lot of people now cannot move into certain school districts because the property taxes are too high. They can't afford $1,200 or $1,500 per month in property taxes. Just a few years ago, $1,200 a month would be the full amount that somebody would maybe pay for their mortgage, and that would include your interest and principal taxes and insurance. And now, they're paying that just in property taxes. So it is something that has to be addressed. We will address it. I think, the governor does have his study committee. But we, as you pointed out, had a housing study committee, which I served on. And I've got to give credit to Michelle Reynolds, who actually just got one of the chamber's legislators of the year because of the housing discussion. And I think that is something that, we will continue to work on this, and it has to be worked on, because if you have high property taxes, that also hurts the ability for housing stock. If you have a lot of government regulations that have increased the cost to build housing, that also increases the values faster than they otherwise would, which then in turn causes your property taxes to go up. So we've got to start reining in some of those other issues around it, such as overly burdensome government regulations that have driven up costs.
Well, for decades and decades, home ownership has been the one way to build wealth, individual wealth in America. It's the way people, start with the starter home, save to get the starter home, and then as their family grows, their different
types of, living conditions, or the next house and the next house. And then do we downsize? It's part of the cycle, but that's how you build wealth.
Absolutely. And a lot of people are building wealth, but the problem is if you can't afford to stay in it because the property taxes have gone through the roof, you're not going to keep that wealth long. And in fact, we're actually starting to see some corrections in the housing market where housing prices are going down in some markets. And even here in Ohio, you're starting to see them level off or fall because people just can't afford the higher values, but they also can't afford the property taxes.
Thanks for tuning in to the President's Podcast. Also, thank you for watching this entire time as this channel has really grown. In fact, in the last month, more than 100,000 views. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you soon.